Hello and welcome to a new video presented by Telescope-Service. My name is Thorsten, and in this video I want to give you a little introduction into the current TS-Optics ToupTek cameras. As you know, technology is changing pretty rapidly, and this is why I said current cameras. So this list may be also extended in the future. And as a reference, only just to show you some examples of this list of cameras, I have here the TS-492MP camera, a mono camera, the TS-183CA, a one-shot color camera, and a guide camera, the GP70-2000B. At the moment we can offer you 10 different cameras of this TS-Optics ToupTek brand, and I will briefly go through each of these cameras, and therefore I prepared a list that I will reference in the video later on too. When you look for a camera, you have to choose between different parameters, different options. And the first thing you have to decide is, do you want a cooled or an uncooled camera? So by the way, this grouping is just from my side, so you can group it of course in a different way. Maybe you look only for pixel size or something like that. I grouped it in that way that you can see here in this list, but it's up to you to decide what your preferred parameters are. We have the cooled cameras. That means, for example, it's a camera like this one here, the TS-492. We have an active cooled camera. You need 12 volt power supply, and with that 12 volt a Peltier element is powered that will cool the sensor down to a specified temperature. And there is a delta T reachable of around 35 degrees. For all these cooled cameras it's pretty much the same. The other option are the so-called air-cooled cameras, like this TS-183CA. So you have a bigger housing than an uncooled camera because there is a fan integrated in the back. But this is a low power fan. You don't need a separate 12 volt power supply. It's just powered by USB, and with this fan you can reduce the temperature also by some degrees. And the last option, these are pretty new ones, the uncooled cameras. So there are two versions available, and they are mainly used for guiding purposes, like here in this guide scope, but they are also very usable for planetary photography, for example. All solar system photography is also possible with these lightweight and versatile uncooled cameras. The next thing you have to decide is, do you want a monochrome camera or a one-shot color camera? For the monochrome cameras we offer you three cooled versions, starting with the TS-183MP. So MP is the abbreviation for monochrome Peltier cooled. This camera uses a small sensor, 13 by 7 millimeters, but offers you 20 megapixel of image resolution. That means you have very small pixels. 2.4 micron pixels are used in that camera. It's pretty much the same sensor as with this one. This is what you can expect here. So a 1-inch sensor, that's called 1-inch format. And that's because of the 20 megapixel, that's a pretty interesting camera. You can use it with a short focal length telescope, like a very small apochromatic refractor, or you can use it for high quality planetary imaging. Another option for a monochrome camera is the TS-492MP, also monochrome Peltier cooled, and that camera is a bit special. It is particularly this one. Let's just open the cap that you can see the sensor. That's a 4/3 sensor. And this sensor offers you a pretty interesting feature. The normal use is in the 2x2 bin mode, where it creates an 11 megapixel image. That means you have around 4.6 micron pixel size, which is a rather large value. That's already a nice combination for long focal lengths, something above 800 millimeters. Or maybe above 1000. I used that here with that Ungekühlte with 1300 millimeters, which worked pretty well. But the more important thing is the 1x1 bin mode, and that's the so-called quad bin mode. This is a special feature that this Sony sensors offers to you. You can unlock this mode just when you use the 1x1 bin mode, and you have this high resolution mode. Then the pixel size is only 2.3 micron, and that gives you an image resolution of over 40 megapixels, which is great. This is especially great also for very short focal lengths telescopes, maybe also telephoto lenses will be a good combination with that camera, and that provides you just an ultra high resolution. Now in the meantime, let me just tell you some of the major features of these cameras. So they come all in the same housing. That means you also have the same back focus. The back focus of these cameras, all TS-Optics ToupTek cameras, except these uncooled ones, is 17.5 millimeters. This is a pretty, let's say, standard value, 17.5 millimeters. They all have this T-thread here, M42, and the monochrome cameras uses a clear glass window here. So you have to ensure by choosing the proper filters that you also get an UV-IR block effect here. So the last camera from the monochrome cooled is the TS2600MP. This is currently also a pretty well-known camera with a well-known sensor, the IMX571 sensor. This is maybe the most versatile camera because this camera offers you 3.8 micron pixels, so a medium-sized value, a good combination for all telescopes ranging from, let's say, 400 to 900 millimeters focal length. It's an APS-C sensor, so pretty large. You have to ensure that your telescope can illuminate APS-C properly. And it's also the same housing like this one. Okay, now just briefly, the color-cooled cameras. Color cameras means you have a Bayer pattern applied onto the front of the sensor. A RGB Bayer pattern. That means that you get a color image out of one shot. That's why they call it one-shot color. And this is a very simple approach or very simple start in astrophotography, because you don't have to fiddle around with filters. You just put the camera in the telescope, maybe add a light pollution filter or dual narrowband filter, something like that, and you're good to go. You can just start capturing images. And with the cooling you can reduce the dark current and also create your proper calibration library. So in this list we can start with the TS533CP, and we have the CP for color Peltier cooled. This 533 sensor is a bit special because it uses a square format, 11 by 11 millimeters square format, and also 3.8 micron pixels. That gives you a rather low resolution of 9 megapixels, but that's a very interesting beginner camera because the field of view is pretty small. Nearly every telescope can illuminate that field, and the pixel size is a good medium value, valid for many telescope combinations. And this is also one of the newer sensors, this 533, and it is pretty much noise free, so you don't have amplifier current that is messing up your image. So that's a good choice if you want to start with a more or less simple camera. By the way, these color cameras are equipped with a UV-IR cut filter in front of the camera, so you can directly start imaging if you want. And of course, a T-thread connection and also 17.5 millimeters back focus. The next camera on the list is the TS294CP. This sensor is also pretty well known from an ZWO camera, or also QHY uses the sensor. This is interesting because it's also very high responsive, more than 80% QE, and it's back illuminated. And it's also a 4/3 sensor, so medium-sized value. But the interesting thing is this one uses a pretty large pixel size of 4.7 micron. And that means it gives you 11 megapixel resolution. So this is a very nice combination with a Ritchie-Chrétien or a Schmidt-Cassegrain, or even with long focal length Newtonians. there's one thing to mention with this camera and also with the 183 that I mentioned before. This generation of sensors is the previous generation. It's still very new, let's say 5 years or something, pretty new, but they have the little problem that they create a very high amplifier noise. You will see a strange pattern when you capturing dark frames, a very bright part of the image on the corner which produces streaks in your image. But from experience I can tell you, don't bother too much with it, because when you take calibration frames, dark calibration frames and dark flats, then you can calibrate this away. Together with this TS2600 mono version, we offer also a color version that uses the same sensor but as a color version. So same characteristics overall, just with the Bayer pattern. So if you like color shots more, then that camera is your solution. So on this list is also the TS410 CP, which stands a bit on the edge of the list, but unjustly so, because that camera is a full frame camera. This is pretty interesting. Full frame means 36 by 24 millimeters sensor size, which is really large, and provides you 24 megapixels of image size. And that results in a very large pixel size of nearly 6 micron. And that makes that camera also very interesting. With these large pixels, you get a very high full well capacity, so the stars will not blow out so easily and so quick. With 24 megapixels and this pixel size, you can use it with very long focal lengths. With 2000mm Ritchie-Chrétien, no problem, or Schmidt-Cassegrain of course, is working pretty well. The only thing you have to ensure is that your optical system can correct and illuminate that full frame sensor, which is not that easy. But if you want to have a very large field of view, then that would be a good choice. Oh, by the way, that camera don't use a T connection, that uses an M54 threading, just to provide you a large opening in the front, that you don't get any vignetting by the camera housing itself. And that camera, of course, all these cool cameras needs a power supply to operate properly. So let's check out the housing of these cool cameras. As I mentioned, we have the T-thread here in front, and in the back we have the USB 3 connection where you connect your PC. We have an integrated USB 2 hub with 2 connections where you can attach a filter wheel or a focuser, just to get rid of the cabling issues down the mount. The 12 volt power supply is here where you put in the power supply, and we have also some LEDs integrated here in the back. These just give you a quick overview if everything is working. We have the power lamp, we have communication lamp, cooler and the fan lamp. So that's pretty interesting, pretty nice to have also some very simple visible status information in back of the camera. Okay, 4 cameras left. Now we check out the air-cooled versions. So that was my example here, the TS183CA camera. Did I mention that beautiful blue color? That's really nice. This camera also offers you that 2-inch barrel here. That means you can also put it with the short one in your focuser, clamp it, and that's it. So you don't need any more adapter spacers, whatever. And this is possible with these air-cooled versions. So this camera here, the 183, uses the same sensor that I mentioned before, but here as color version. That means you have the same 20 megapixel sensor, but with the Bayer pattern applied, and you will achieve a 20 megapixel color image with one shot. This is pretty nice. I used it with different telescopes, mostly for lunar imaging, because the moon is just up in the sky, But I also did deep-sky photography. This is also possible. Then the calibration is not that point on, because yeah, you just don't have the proper temperature for your calibration frames. But it's still working if you start with astrophotography, or you don't want to spend too much money on the camera, or want to have an additional planetary camera. This is also working for deep sky. Another option is the so-called TS-485CA camera. It's the same housing, but this camera uses a little bit smaller sensor, 11 by 6 millimeters, with 2.9 micron pixel size. That gives you roughly 8 megapixel of image size. So a bit smaller field of view, but also a fantastic planetary camera. And as mentioned before, these air-cooled cameras use only USB connection to get working, no power supply required here. What you also get with the air-cooled cameras is this auto guide port. That's an ST4 port for that RJ12 connector cable that connects to your mount if you want to use ST4 guiding. That's also usable as a guide camera. A very high quality guide camera, of course. Okay, last but not least, we have two additional cameras which are mostly described as guide cameras. They are available as a color version and a mono version, and they are really new. They use an IMX290 sensor for the color version. This one uses a 5.6 by 3 millimeter sensor, gives you something above 2 megapixels of image size. And yeah, it is intended for guiding, but the color version is also very valid for planetary photography. This camera uses a 1¼ inch housing with that stop ring here, where it can be placed in the focuser. And this offers you also the USB 2 connection and the ST4 port. Cables are included, so this is good to go. Oh, by the way, this also comes with a C-mount adapter, so if you want to connect a C-mount lens, that's possible directly here on that black ring. In the same housing we offer you also the mono version that uses an IMX3-7 sensor with pretty much the same specs, 2.1 megapixels, 2.9 micron pixel size. This is then a really good guiding camera also. Okay, that was a very quick overview about our cameras. I hope you found this interesting and it gives you some hints what to look for, and maybe you already choose your next camera. Another thing that I want to mention is the software. Of course, all these cameras are ASCOM compatible. We deliver you also the drivers, they come with the cameras on CD or a USB drive, and also they are downloadable on the website. We offer you also a dedicated software, the TS-Sky software, which is also brand labeled. And this is intended to work especially with these cameras. And the software provides you all the features from just exposures, selection, all of the bin modes, the cooling. You can do region of interest, which is also pretty interesting for planetary photography. You can do live stacking in the software, save the photos as fits, TIFF, whatever you prefer. Okay, now we have reached the end of the video, but I want to also show you some of my shots that I took with these cameras over the past weeks. If you have questions, specific questions on one of these cameras from the list, feel free to drop a comment below the video. Unfortunately, it's not possible to cover all the cameras in one video. Thank you very much for viewing and see you next time. Bye bye.